Kirk to Rayborn, report. I'm required to make a security confirmation. When I call my ship, if you list your personnel, cargo requirements, any special needs.
Science fiction has always given writers a strange kind of freedom. Wrap a dangerous idea in a rubber forehead alien or a far-off planet, and suddenly you can say things a straight drama never could. Star Trek used that freedom more aggressively than almost any show of its era, and it paid a price for it. While American audiences mostly shrugged off the franchise's boldest swings, broadcasters overseas didn't always agree. A handful of episodes were trimmed, delayed for decades, or refused a broadcast slot entirely, and some of those restrictions have never fully been lifted. Today, we're digging into 3 of them: what actually happens on screen, and why network censors decided these stories cross a line the rest of the show never did. The 8th episode of the original series starts off feeling almost cozy. The Enterprise picks up a distress signal from a planet that, according to censors, is an almost exact duplicate of Earth. Kirk leads a landing party down expecting a routine investigation, and instead finds a ghost town that looks frozen sometime in the middle of the 20th century. Bicycles left on lawns, toys scattered on porches. Not a single adult in sight. The quiet doesn't last. A grotesquely scarred man lunges at the crew, babbling and violent, before collapsing and dying in front of them. Shortly after, they're spotted by a girl who calls herself Miri. She's terrified of the landing party, referring to them with a slur of her own invention, grups, a corrupted word for grown-ups that carries genuine venom and how the planet's children use it. Miri eventually explains why. On this world, becoming an adult isn't just inevitable, it's a death sentence. She and the other surviving children are what's left after every grown-up on the planet was wiped out by a plague that turns its victims violent, delusional, and eventually fatal. The landing party doesn't stay safe for long. Purple lesions begin appearing on their skin, the unmistakable first symptom of the same disease. In the planet's abandoned research facility, the crew pieces together what happened. Centuries earlier, scientists here have been chasing a life extension breakthrough. It worked. In a sense, the children wandering the ruins are actually hundreds of years old, aging at a fraction of the normal rate, trapped in kids' bodies with kids' emotional volatility despite their staggering age. The experiment that was supposed to grant them longer lives instead killed every adult on the planet almost instantly once puberty hit, leaving the young ones in a permanent, twisted childhood. McCoy races to synthesize a cure before the disease can finish the crew off, but the episode's real tension comes from the children themselves. Jealous, frightened, and manipulated by their own instability, they turn on the landing party. Communicators are stolen. Janice Rand is captured and held. What began as a rescue mission spirals into something closer to a siege, with Kirk cornered and beaten by a mob of panicked, ancient but childlike assailants. He only breaks through by appealing to the one thing that might still move them, reminding the older children that the youngest among them will die without their help. It works. The devices are returned. McCoy tests an unproven vaccine on himself, and the outbreak is finally contained. None of that reads like typical 1966 network television, and British broadcasters agreed. Miri, aired once on the BBC, drew a wave of complaints over the handling of diseased, violent children, and was quietly dropped from the rotation for years afterward. The subject matter, kids as both victims and threats, aging horror wrapped around a children's story premise, struck a nerve that other episodes of the era simply didn't. If Miri unsettled audiences with body horror, whom gods destroy, went after something more psychological. The premise starts simply enough. The Enterprise is assigned to deliver medical supplies to Elba II, a high-security asylum housing the Federation's most dangerous, criminally insane patients. It should be an in-and-out delivery. It isn't. By the time Kirk and Spock beam down, the facility has already been seized from the inside. Running the show is Garth Vazar, once was Starfleet's most celebrated captains, now a shattered mind convinced he's destined to conquer the galaxy. Garth's condition comes with an unsettling power. He can shapeshift, taking on the appearance of anyone he chooses, which he uses to infiltrate, deceive, and terrorize both his fellow inmates and the landing party. Posing as a base's chief medical officer, he manipulates the situation long enough to trap Kirk and Spock inside his asylum, with no clean way out. What follows isn't a rescue mission so much as an extended psychological gauntlet. Garth doesn't just want to defeat Kirk. He wants to break him, needling at his ego and forcing him into degrading situations meant to prove Garth's superiority. The other inmates, kept in line through fear rather than treatment, become pawns in Garth's delusions of conquest. In one of the more startling beats for a mid-1960s broadcast, Garth kills a fellow patient without hesitation, purely to demonstrate that he can. It's not staged as tragic or cautionary. It's staged as a display of dominance, which makes it land harder. The episode's climax turns into an identity puzzle. Garth, still shape-shifted, impersonates Kirk so convincingly that Spock has to determine which Kirk, standing in front of him, is real before the situation turns fatal. Logic wins out over chaos. Garth is subdued, and order is restored to Elba too, but the road there is soaked in cruelty, madness, and violence that reads far darker than the adventure of the weak tone the show usually promised. British broadcasters once again balked. The BBC judged the episode too intense for general audiences, citing its sustained focus on mental collapse, torment, and sudden brutality as more than family television could bear. Where American viewers got a tense character study wrapped in a sci-fi bottle episode, UK audiences got nothing at all for years. The most famous entry on this list earns its spot not for violence, but for a single brief moment that rewired what was considered acceptable on American television. In Plato's Stepchildren, Kirk and Uhura are taken captive by a society of psychokinetic aliens modeling themselves after ancient Greek philosophy. Using their mental powers, the aliens force the two officers together against their will, and the result is a kiss between a white man and a black woman broadcast live on a major American network, one of the earliest scripted interracial kisses to air on U.S. television. The scene itself is short. Its consequences were not. Inside the network, the anxiety wasn't really about mainstream American audiences. Internal worry centered specifically on how affiliate stations in the Deep South, still operating under the shadow of segregationist attitudes, would react the moment airing in their markets. Contingency plans were reportedly discussed for filming an alternate, kiss-free version just in case stations refused to run the episode as written. In the end, the backlash many executives braced for mostly didn't materialize. Complaints trickled in, but nowhere near the flood the network feared, suggesting American viewers were more ready to move forward than the people running the switchboards assumed. Overseas, the reaction went the other way. When the series made its way to British television, the BBC opted not to air Plato's Stepchildren at all. The network's official explanation pointed to the episode's brutality. Beyond the kiss, the story includes scenes of Kirk and other captives being tormented, humiliated, and physically abused by their captors purely for entertainment. Whether that explanation tells the whole story is something historians still debate. Many have pointed out that the timing and framing of the band line up awkwardly well with a story built around interracial romance, leading some to suspect the stated reason wasn't the only one in play. Whatever the true mix of motives, the episode joined a small club of Star Trek stories that simply never made it to UK screens in their original broadcast window, and its absence stretched on for years. It's worth stepping back and asking why a program about spaceships and alien planets kept running into this much resistance from broadcasters. The answer traces back to how the show was built from day one. Creator Gene Roddenberry didn't just want an adventure series. He wanted a vehicle for ideas that network executives of the era would never have greenlit if he'd pitched them directly. He famously sold the concept to NBC using safer, more familiar comparisons, describing it at various points as a kind of frontier adventure story relocated to space. Privately, though, he was chasing something closer to old-fashioned satire. Stories that worked as entertainment on the surface, while sneaking in commentary on war, prejudice, and human nature underneath. That structure gave Roddenberry and his writer's room to smuggle in material that would have been rejected outright in a contemporary setting. Set a story about racial hatred on an alien world split down the middle by skin color, and network standards and practices departments were far less likely to flinch than if the same story were set in an American city. Dress up a commentary on Cold War paranoia as a conflict between two rival star empires, and it read as fiction rather than pointed political criticism. This approach let the show tackle war, class division, authoritarianism, and prejudice more directly than almost anything else on television at the time, and it's exactly why the show pushed hard enough, often enough, to draw real censorship in places less willing to look the other way. The result was a series with an unusually diverse cast for its era, storylines that treated audiences as capable of handling difficult material, and a creative team willing to test how far a network would let them go. Sometimes that meant a quietly radical moment slipped through, like the kiss in Plato's Stepchildren. Other times it meant full episodes were judged too intense, too strange, or too uncomfortable for broadcast in certain markets, and got pulled entirely. None of these 3 episodes were banned for cheap shock value. Miri forced audiences to sit with the horror of childhood trapped in an endless, violent limbo. Whom gods destroy. Turn a Starfleet hero into a study of what unchecked delusion and cruelty look like up close. Plato's Stepchildren didn't need violence at all to become controversial. A single kiss was enough to make broadcasters nervous about how the country and the world would respond. What ties them together is a willingness to make viewers uncomfortable in service of a larger point, rather than discomfort for its own sake. That's a difficult needle to thread, and it's exactly the kind of storytelling that tend to age into legend rather than fade into obscurity. Decades later, these episodes are still discussed, still debated, and in some regions, still treated with the same caution broadcasters show when they first cross their desks. It says something about a 50-year-old television show that its most controversial hours can still spark this much conversation. Star Trek wasn't just predicting the future of technology or space travel. It was testing, episode by episode, how much of an uncomfortable truth an audience was willing to sit with. Sometimes the answer, at least for a network executive somewhere with a finger on the broadcast switch, was simply, not yet. So, which of these 3 do you think deserved the ban, and which one do you think broadcasters got wrong? Let us know your take in the comments, and if stories about television's boldest, most controversial moments are your thing, stick.